for me personally, one of the turning points in the war was an interview I had with Sky News in the UK. This was during the first hostage release pause, when Israel had agreed to a pause in the fighting and would release 10 Palestinian prisoners for every one hostage we got back. Sorry, 3 Palestinian prisoners for every one hostage. And the news anchor asked me whether the fact that Israel was willing to release 3 Palestinian prisoners for every one hostage meant that Israel valued Palestinian lives less. Now, I responded by raising my eyebrows in a comical and dramatic fashion, and that went viral across Israel, because it really spoke to something a lot of Israelis feel, that sometimes it doesn't matter what we do or what we say. There are always going to be people around the world who will twist our morality against us. And if the fact that we're willing to put dangerous criminals and terrorists back on the street in order to get back babies for God's sake, who are abducted by Hamas death squads, means that somehow we're the immoral ones, then we definitely have an uphill climb here in explaining ourselves to the world.
Joining me today is a former Israeli government spokesman and international media advisor to the president of Israel, Eylon Levy. Good to see you. I was about to say meet you, but we did meet briefly in Israel.
It's good to see you again and in the free state of Florida.
It is good to have you here in the free state of Florida. So my audience knows, and I just mentioned to you, I disappear for August. So we are taping this at the end of July, but we're going to air it middle of August. Obviously, many things can change
there's nothing
in America,
much happening in the world now.
In Israel. Basically,
we're going through a quiet period.
Yeah. We wish we were going through a quiet period, or you certainly wish you were going through a quiet period. But there's a lot going on in the world, obviously. You had, I would say, because it's no longer your job, we'll get into your current job, but you had, I think, one of the most difficult jobs of all of the end of 23, let's say, into much of 24, representing Israel on the national stage. So first, I guess, how does somebody get a job like that? Give me like a minute bio, and then we'll go into everything else.
Yeah, you're right. It's not an easy job being a spokesman for Israel during a war. The Atlantic said it's a job that's fit for a patriot, a masochist, or a diva, or preferably all three. So I tick the boxes.
Yeah.
Look, when the October 7th massacre happened, I was a private citizen. I was caught at home with these sirens that rang out at 7:30 in the morning when the whole country came under a massive missile attack. And something amazing happened on October 7th. The whole of Israeli society, which had been deeply polarized, some horrible political arguments, came together and everyone said, what can we do to help the war effort? Because there's only one thing that matters right now: defeating Hamas, driving them back, bringing back the hostages, because we're in a war for our homes. And so people started doing whatever they could. Dizengoff Square near my home became a central point where people would donate socks and toothpaste and whatever they could. And anyone who had a car was driving soldiers to their bases. And I started giving media interviews from my living room as a former advisor to the president. Within a few days, I get a phone call from the Prime Minister's office inviting me to come and join the media efforts, because this was the only story in the world. And the eyes of the world were on Israel as it was still fighting back the Hamas invasion by air, land, and sea. And that started a roller coaster of nearly 6 months in which I found myself making Israel's case to the global media on television and radio.
So there's a kind of 2 prongs to this, because on one hand, for at least, 48 hours, 72 hours, you guys just had to deal with the immediacy of securing the border, and it was the northern border as well, and everything else. And then also trying to live have a civil society function like that. That is not easy.
October 7th was a moment when the state fell apart, essentially. People in the kibbutzim, where Hamas death squads were rampaging, were wondering, where is the army? And the country was saved because of a civil society that took responsibility. Israelis didn't sit at home and switch on their TVs and say, well, it's okay, the government will take care of this. People committed themselves to doing whatever they could personally. For some people, it meant grabbing their weapons and going to fight in the kibbutzim. We're recording this just after the Prime Minister's speech in Congress. He spoke of one of the young soldiers, an Ethiopian Israeli, who ran 8 miles to get to his base in order to help defend against the kibbutzim, because people didn't wait for the state or the government to do things for them. They realized this is a fight for our lives, fight for survival, a fight for our homes, and they just took action.
So then your profile gets elevated. Now you're working for the Prime Minister's office. Is one of the strange things that Israel is caught between is having to defend itself physically in a war against a terrorist organization that will literally do anything, and then also have to defend itself to Western media that basically gets pretty much everything wrong always, especially as it pertains to Israel.
It often felt like I was living in a topsy-turvy world where the facts have no correlation with what is being reported in the media, a media that will automatically believe anything Hamas says and disbelieve anything Israel says. And we saw this right at the beginning of the war when Hamas put out a press release claiming that an Israeli airstrike had destroyed a hospital and killed 500 people. And it turned out that it was a
front
rocket
page of the
shrapnel,
New York Times. That's what
rocket shrapnel from Palestinian Islamic Jihad, fired from a cemetery, by the way, that had hit the car park of a hospital and killed a few dozen people. And yet the story went around the world that Israel was somehow responsible. And when I look now, for example, at world leaders accusing Israel of targeting healthcare facilities or schools inside Gaza and remaining completely silent about how Hamas terrorists have weaponized and militarized those facilities. Just yesterday, Hamas terrorists fired a rocket from inside a humanitarian zone that Israel had designated that hit an UNRWA school. They fired from inside a humanitarian zone and hit a school. You won't hear a
Meaning
word.
hit a school in their own territory.
They hit one of their own schools.
Yeah.
They hit a Palestinian school, but you won't hear a word of criticism from the international organizations that are supposed to be advancing peace and security. And time again, we hear media reports that will be accusing Israel of operating against Palestinian hospitals as if the terrorists were not using their basements in order to wage military operations. For me personally, one of the turning points in the war was an interview I had with Sky News in the UK. This was during the first hostage release pause, when Israel had agreed to a pause in the fighting and would release 10 Palestinian prisoners for every one hostage we got back. Sorry, 3 Palestinian prisoners for every one hostage. And the news anchor asked me whether the fact that Israel was willing to release 3 Palestinian prisoners for every one hostage meant that Israel valued Palestinian lives less. Now, I responded by raising my eyebrows in a comical and dramatic fashion, and that went viral across Israel, because it really spoke to something a lot of Israelis feel, that sometimes it doesn't matter what we do or what we say. There are always going to be people around the world who will twist our morality against us. And if the fact that we're willing to put dangerous criminals and terrorists back on the street in order to get back babies for God's sake, who are abducted by Hamas death squads, means that somehow we're the immoral ones, then we definitely have an uphill climb here in explaining ourselves to the world.
So did you have any sense of how hostile the media was going to be, or dishonest, or anything else? Because I almost think at this point that the Israeli foreign minister's office should just not be doing these interviews anymore and just say, you're all liars, we're just going to do what we got to do, and that's that. I know that there's probably reasons you can't do that, but...
Yeah, look, I hear this a lot in Israel as well. People saying, what's the point of explaining ourselves to the world? They're going to hate us anyway. And you know what? After October 7th, I don't think we need to explain ourselves to the world. After October 7th, I think we know exactly why we are fighting to destroy Hamas, bring back the hostages, make sure October 7th can never happen again. And there are many other people in the world who owe us answers. UNRWA owes answers about why it's indoctrinating Palestinian children, letting Hamas terrorists fight out of its schools, and funding salaries of terrorists who took part in the October 7th
But do you think those
massacre.
Answers will ever come? I mean, they basically are a terrorist organization. I don't have a problem saying it.
UNRWA is a Hamas front.
Yeah.
UNRWA is a Hamas front, and the Knesset has just passed in the first reading a bill that would designate UNRWA as a terrorist organization. But my point is this. There are many people in the world who owe Israel answers. The World Health Organization owes us answers why they pretend that terrorists get immunity if they hide in the basement of a hospital because they attack Israel for acting against Hamas terrorists hiding in a hospital instead of against the Hamas terrorists hiding in that hospital. But Israel is not the United States. The United States is the world's only superpower. It spans a whole continent, and the United States can have the luxury sometimes of saying, we will do what we have to do to defend our interests and the whole world can go to hell. Israel's a small country. We're only 9 million people. We're in a very hostile region. What we are encountering right now is a war in which Israel is under attack by the Iranian regime and its proxy armies on 7 different fronts. And in order to win that, in order to win this proxy war against a shared enemy of Israel and the United States, we need the support of our allies. We need our allies to stand behind us and give us the military, moral, and diplomatic support, and to put sanctions on our enemies. Not to give more funding to our enemies, like UNRWA, which is a Hamas front, while threatening Israeli leaders with repercussions. And that's why it's so important for Israel, despite the hostility in the international media, to stand for the justice of our cause and to dispel the lies. And by the way, that's part of what I'm doing in the United States now. It's part of a global tour to try to make Israel's case and bring the truth to light.
If you're looking for more enlightening conversations about international issues, check out our international playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, watch our full episode playlist, all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.